Folks, my name is John Lytle. I'm an assistant prosecuting attorney here in Muskingum County, Ohio. Earlier this week, one of my good friends, a detective with the narcotics unit, was stuck in his hand with a needle from a narcotics abuser. This seemingly daily risk occurrence resulted in him having to go to the hospital, receive numerous shots, take medication for a course of months to ensure that he is not infected with things from the various narcotics abusers who had been using that needle. And that experience, stressful for any officer and their friends, highlights one of the many flaws in State Issue 1. Because under State Issue 1, nothing that happened there could even be a criminal offense. The possession and the use of the needle, the drugs that are in the needle, don't matter. Non-criminal. And I thought, well, this is probably a good enough reason for me to finally sit down and make a video expressing my opinion on this ill-conceived and ill-pursued constitutional amendment. The first bad thing about this amendment is that it gives a 25% sentence reduction to nearly every single person in prison. The only people excluded are those who have been convicted of specific crimes, rape and murder, only those two crimes, not the other associated crimes that you think of as being rape and murder, sexual battery, gross sexual imposition, all of the things that constitute the Me Too movement. Those all get a 25% sentence reduction. Same thing with related to murder. Involuntary manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter. The only things that are not subject to that is the crime of murder. And ironically, the amendment does not include the crime of aggravated murder, which is more serious than murder. And so aggravated murderers can be eligible for a reduction. Because what matters in a constitutional amendment is the words that are used, not the intent. Same thing with kitty touchers. The amendment says, well, this doesn't include child molestation. Well, that's not a crime in Ohio. We have gross sexual imposition. We have other things that constitute that. They're not excluded. And so kitty touchers will get a 25% sentence reduction under State Issue 1. Inexcusable. And a lot of times in our community, we've seen people crying out, wanting Issue 1 to pass. And in my experience, many of those people are persons who are related to or associated with people who are in prison for doing things like home invasions. One situation where someone held 7 people hostage, including children, at gunpoint. That doesn't sound like the type of crime that should get a 25% sentence reduction to me. And then let's talk about the legalization of bulk possession of synthetic opioids, because this is important. People think, well, we'll just catch them when they are receiving their shipment or when they are transacting in these drugs. Well, that's not how it works. When you have fentanyl and carfentanil, these synthetic opioids, they're just shipped in from China. So you get a mailer of what is a misdemeanor quantity, a non-punishable misdemeanor quantity of fentanyl, and you're able to cut it into kilos of heroin. So when someone's on the street and they buy heroin, they think they're buying heroin, but what they're really buying is fentanyl that's been cut down to what is an equivalent heroin dose. So the people that we're dealing with here are not stupid. They're amoral and they want to make money. And in this case, you're just legalizing that process because it's not trafficking in drugs, no matter how you describe it, by when you receive a shipment. So that brings us to the idea of, well, geez, what does this do? We're just going to say possession of even a user amount of heroin, we're just going to make it a non-punishable, unclassified misdemeanor. Well, what that means is that it is less of a crime and less punishable for a person to possess heroin than it is for them to possess alcohol when they are underage. Is that the message that we're trying to send to our kids? I don't think so. It's the message that some people want to. Treatment. This whole thing fetishizes the idea of treatment as an alternative to making drugs illegal. Well, here's the thing. The amendment kills treatment. There is no treatment. Because, and this might be news to some people, but people who are addicted to drugs and use drugs, they like it. They don't want to stop. They like to continue using their drugs. And we have ways to try and affect their choice and what they want, but that's the only thing that matters in terms of changing their mindset. They have to want to change. Sometimes people's family can encourage them and get them to the point where they want to change. Good. Sometimes people's friends and their social group can encourage them to want to change. More often than not, it's the opposite direction. But if that happens, great. But when it gets down to the criminal justice system, it's not friends and family anymore. There's only a few things that you can do to try and make someone want to change, which is the only way that treatment works. And the first way is someone fears an outcome that they don't like. They don't want to get locked up in jail. They don't want to go to prison. They don't want to do those things. So they're fearful of it. They say, I'm going to change my life because I don't want to suffer that outcome. And that's good. It's one way that we can get somebody, what we say in the treatment area is to their bottom, where they say, okay, that's it. I'm ready to change. But for some people, that's not the case. And for most of the time, what the issue is they don't want to have the consequence. And wanting to avoid the consequence, they are willing to pretend to want treatment. And then they enter into a treatment program that they have no interest in engaging with. And they undermine that program for other people who do want it. And the program knows, and they weed them out. But here's the problem with issue one, is if you go into the program and you don't want to engage and you don't care, there's nothing else that can be done. You've just been given up on. Right now, if you don't want treatment, then the next step is, okay, unfortunately, there's going to be a punishment and a consequence, which might be the thing that makes you say, I don't want this anymore and I want to change. And that's the next step for us. There's a punishment and a consequence, and hopefully that brings somebody to the point where they say, I don't want to do this anymore, and they engage with treatment, and we get them treatment. But if you take out that ability, you remove entirely any incentive for that group that does not want treatment and is willing to just come into court and say, sure, yeah, I'll go to treatment so long as I don't get any punishment. I think anybody who's had experience with an addict, and everyone that I know has, myself included, knows that that's just not how change happens. And so state issue one essentially claims that it's for treatment, and what it does is kill treatment. One next point on that is just trying to understand what do we consider to be efficient treatment in our state. Our most effective programs are called drug courts. Drug court, you get assigned to a drug court, you meet every week. The judge is there trying to encourage you to go into treatment, monitoring heavily everything that you're doing. If you don't do what you need to do, there's graduated sanctions, something that the amendment attempts to talk about. With all of those things, do you know what the success rate for Ohio's highest success treatment program is? And that success is meaning you go through the program, you graduate, and then you don't go back to using drugs. 11%. 11% is our most successful treatment. So that brings me to the last part, which is probation is dead. So this amendment doesn't limit its restrictions on probation to just drug crimes. It's every crime. If you're on probation, you don't have to do anything, and you can't be violated or suffer a consequence. That's it. It's that simple. Your probation officer says, where are you living? You say, I don't want to tell you. Can't be violated. Gives you a curfew. You say, I'm not going to comply. Can't be violated. In the state of Ohio, if someone steals $149,999.99 from you, by law, they have to be placed on probation. If they say, I'm not paying it back, not one dime, they can't be violated on their probation. They can have the money in their hand in the probation office. And they can say, I'm not going to pay it. And on top of that, I'm going to call my victim. I'm going to tell them that I have the money and that I'm not going to pay it for them. No violation. Because a stay away or a no contact order with the victim is no longer punishable. This amendment is ill-conceived and extremely poorly executed and will have long-term negative effects on every aspect of criminal justice in this state. And if you think that is a good idea, you're wrong.